You kind of lost me at data transfer. I don't know what's going on.
FTP, file transfer protocol.
Now, what we have to remember is that not every position can be changed to every other position.
And making sure that the users we have now stay happy and stay on while trying to attract some other people to play.
They make
Hustle home, but yeah. No, that's over in a heartbeat. Ain't got any problem with that.
Well, welcome, folks, to the first episode of the 2022 year. So hopefully everyone had a very joyous Christmas and a very happy New Year. Thanks for tuning in. This is, I believe, episode 5 of season 4. And Escatrell is expected to be here tonight. TNJ may be here as well as MFN Myers. So all depends on how their personal agendas shake out to see if they can make some free time and join us. But until they do show up, let's go ahead and talk about the Fantasy Football League that we had in Yahoo this year. And it was competitive. It was a pretty good season, especially being an inaugural season. Let me show you some of the things that we had in that league. Let's go with the transactions. You know, that's one of the indicators of just how active a league is, of course, with transactions. Between trades and free agent pickups, we had quite a bit. As you can see, 61 moves, 14. Myers didn't have anything going on there. 20, 13, 41, 45, 50. So you can see people were generally rather active. Now, as far as the trades go, I was involved in both trades that occurred in the league. So hopefully next year we'll have some more trades and be able to get the rosters shaken up just a bit. But let's go ahead and look at how the playoffs ended up this year. There you go. Vinnie Mac was in the quarterfinals. Beat Bushwood Caddies. Of course, you can see he advanced all the way through and beat Bach Shiner in the finals. So congrats to Gavin for taking his Vinnie Mac's team all the way through and winning the first TTATO Fantasy Football League in Yahoo. Final standings, as we mentioned early on, we did have 4 conferences or 4 divisions, if you will: Belichick, Reed, Carroll, and Tomlin. And Vinnie Mac, of course, 11-3. Bushwood, Jumpin' Jehoshaphat's, and Bach Shiners all led their respective divisions. Now, if you'll notice, the Tomlin division, which is where our eventual champion came from, they had 3 teams that were in the top 10. And out of a 16-team league, that's pretty good. As you can see, the other one, Reed, and maybe even Belichick. Carroll, not so much. They had some double-digit teams there, but that doesn't mean things can't turn around for next year. And I know a lot of folks actually tried to recruit for the upcoming season. So, good enjoyment by those folks. We really appreciate everybody coming in and being part of it. Definitely enjoyed it. A little bit of trash talking going on there from time to time. Definitely look forward to having some folks join us next year if we do have some people drop out, because some people may not come back, and I've mentioned that before. So early August, late July time frame, I'll look to post some information on the Gridiron Dynasty forum, alerting folks that the football season's about to start up if they want to get their paws in there to come join us. One big announcement, though, that I do want to share with the folks is what was posted today throughout the Gridiron Dynasty platform, but Sports Hub platform for that matter, and that concerns the planned maintenance shutdown for tomorrow. So it is 7 o'clock Central Time right now. So we're looking at about 10 hours from now, I believe, the servers will go down. You will not have access to the What If Sports or Sports Hub platform to do anything. So plan accordingly. Understand, too, that some teams are in the recruiting process, but as this mentioned, should only be down about 30 minutes. Now, I remember the last time we had a big shutdown, it was planned for about an hour, I believe, and it went over a little bit, and then we had to go down for about another 15 or 20 minutes a day or two later to fix an additional part of the code that they had been working on. But right now they're looking at about 30 minutes downtime. Definitely check on the forum and especially on your standings page in your league, because that's where your message board is for your league. And that's where the admins and the people like Jordan post these type of bits of information concerning your league. So, and concerning the overall Sports Hub platform, I should say. So definitely be mindful of that and understand that it may be longer than 30 minutes. It may be a lot less than 30 minutes. So we won't know until it happens. Anyway, I'll go ahead and pull that off of there. Let's see, what else did we want to discuss tonight? Oh yeah, again, someone was asking about practice and what it improves. So I'm going to just leave that up there again. You've seen it many times before. The conditioning and practicing conditioning improves your athleticism, speed, durability, stamina. All that stuff goes down the list there. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. We did have some questions again about the whole work ethic and potential. There's a thread on that, and we've beaten that horse to death and back. But it's a big concern for the new owners, the new coaches, because they don't have the experience that a lot of us do. So they don't understand just how it all works out and shakes out. And this little image here is one that I have used many times to kind of help folks understand how the work ethic and the potential tie into one another or correlate with one another. And the easiest way to explain it is just imagine that work ethic is a faucet delivering water, and the potential is the size of the cylinder. And the higher the work ethic, the faster the water comes out, the sooner that cylinder fills up. So if you've got a very low potential player, he's going to have a small cylinder. And if you've got very high work ethic, that cylinder is going to fill up. Probably by the time he's a sophomore, you're going to see his cap on his ability and his core values are probably not going to grow very much more, if at all. On the other hand, if you've got a low faucet output, low work ethic, even though he's got a small cylinder to fill up, that very low potential individual may not see his potential reached until he's a senior. And the same would be true for the very high potential on the far opposite end of the scale. The more output you have, the faster that cylinder fills up. So just wanted to throw that up there for you. Did hope to have a couple guys on, like I said, with Escatrell and TNJ and Myers. If they can make it, that'll be great. Want to discuss offensive line setup as far as strategy. Where you put your linemen based on their cores, based on the formation you're setting up, based on the play that you're running out of that formation. And for some of those folks who are at D3, some of that information will be valuable to a certain degree. But once you get into D2 and above, that's where you can actually start tailoring some of those offensive depth charts to be a little more to your personal liking. You know, we get away from the generic running back and offensive lineman to where you can now have an offensive guard, an offensive tackle, an O lineman 1 option, an O lineman 2 option, or a running back, a fullback, a possession running back 1, running back 2. Those type of additional opportunities will allow you to streamline your team and structure it to your potential offense that you're wanting to run. So it'll be better suited and matched with the offense that you're looking to run. So having said that, you know, one of the big questions we get a lot of times is, do the offensive linemen work as a team? Or are certain offensive linemen in use during certain plays in certain formations? Now, the designers have not come out and actually laid it out in black and white and said exactly what position does what in those situations, given the various plays or formations. But from the general consensus of the coaches here and things we've talked with the developers in the past, the basic understanding is that your offensive line operates as a core unit for a single sum total for your offensive line chords. You know, your blocking, your strength, your technique, your athleticism, those things do factor in. So, for instance, if you've got 4 top-notch offensive linemen and you've got them in order, you know, from the left guard or left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle, the best one being on the far left side and the weakest one being on the far right-hand side, and you set up a play that you think is going to run to the left, don't have the misconception that that is the strength of your line to the left side, because it's not. It's a singular core value. And if I'm wrong on this, I really would appreciate if someone provides the data and the support for their position that I'm wrong, so that we can all better understand how that works. But to the best of my knowledge and from what I've had a discussion with others, that is how it works. Unfortunately, again, there are no hard defined black and white tidbits of information from the development team out there to specifically address those issues. So we go from what we've experienced and what we've had to deal with each other and trying to figure things out. Now, I will say this too, is that I believe, and this is just me talking, that if I have a running team, I prefer to have my offensive linemen be the ones that have the best strength rating without giving up too much in blocking. You know, I don't want to have a guy who's got a, let's say D2, for instance, who has a strength rating of 70, but yet his blocking is 10. You know, that's not going to help me a lot on that offensive line. But in the comparison, you know, if I've got an offensive lineman at 70 and a blocking at 60, and an offensive lineman at 69 and a blocking at 65, you know, that's the guy I'm going to use for my running play. You know, he may have a little bit less strength by 1 count in that strength department, but his blocking should more than make up the difference in the two. So you kind of want to find that soft balance, if you will, between those two cores particularly. Now, the other ones that factor in as well are his technique. You know, you can have all the blocking skill and the strength, but if you don't have the technique to get it done, it's pretty much worthless. And the same is being said for your game instinct. You know, if you don't know what it is you're supposed to do and when it is you're supposed to do it, you know, you're just dead meat out there on the field. So, but again, for running plays, I like to favor or lean toward the strength side of the blocking strength scale. And when it comes to passing, I like to lean toward the blocking side. My rationale is for strength, it's just more or less you're going to bully your way through for the running play. And for blocking, it's going to be a little more finesse, which is required a little bit more for your passing plays. That's just my rationale and my thinking. If the guys come on, or, you know, we'll get into that and speak with them to kind of see what their thoughts are as well. On the other hand, you know, I've had questions about the tight end. Does the tight end factor into the offensive line? And the answers I've gotten from the development team is yes, they do in fact add to that defensive line, or the offensive line, I'm sorry. So the problem that you have is a great 5-man offensive line, and then you throw a very weak tight end up there with them, and you're running the ball. That could have, it will have a negative impact over your entire setup as far as your offensive line scheme and the values that are associated with your offensive line. So you want to keep that in mind too. Don't discount the tight ends. They're valuable. They serve their role. They play their purpose. But at the same time, if you're going to be throwing to the tight end, you've got a receiving tight end, and he's going out in the pass pattern. It's irrelevant. He's not going to have an impact on your offensive line blocking for that particular pass play because he's not on the line. He's downfield, hopefully catching the ball for you. So those are some of the things to consider. But again, I wanted to get some input from the other guys and kind of pick their brains. They're a lot more successful than I am at this stuff. So, and we have Mr. Let's see. Is he here? Is he? He is. Look at there.
Hey, Magic.
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
All right. Glad to see you can make it. I understand that there's some scheduling
Yeah.
come up from time to time, so we really appreciate you busting butt and getting in here after your afternoon schedule. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I had some basketball practice to run before this, so I tried to wrap it up early, but the kids wouldn't let me go.
So what college are you coaching in real life for basketball? D1.
USC. Yeah.
There you go.
No,
Well,
it's
again, welcome aboard, and hope you had a great Christmas and a happy New Year.
yeah. Thanks. You too. We did. It was good. Quiet. Kids were sick the whole winter break, so but it forced us to do nothing except stay home and play Gridiron Dynasty, essentially.
So that's the secret. That's the key. I knew there was a
Exactly.
nugget of wisdom that we're going to get here tonight, and that's it. Get everybody sick, stay home, and just play.
Exactly.
Well, I've been talking to the folks briefly about the offensive line setup, in that first and foremost, there is nothing in writing clear cut that identifies exactly what positions do what best for what play given what formation. And the offensive line 5-man front basically operates as a single unit. The tight end factors in on blocking plays, but doesn't factor in on passing plays. And again, I kind of addressed the fact that when I'm running a running play, I like to have those offensive linemen that don't give up too much in blocking, but have the higher strength values. When passing plays, I like to use a little more blocking value. And I've heard some folks say they prefer a little more, game instinct or technique for blocking when it comes to pass plays. Go ahead and share with us, if you will, kind of your philosophy on your offensive line, given what you're trying to do, without giving up too many of your secrets. Yeah.
Sure. So I for offensive line, I guess it's different when I'm recruiting versus when I'm game planning, right? So recruiting, I don't, to be honest, pay too much attention. I do look at the cores. I generally trust my overall rating as I'm recruiting, and then as I get down to the nitty gritty, like deciding between, am I going to sign this guy or this guy? Then I'm going to start looking at some of the cores and getting a little deeper into. I typically prefer strength over blocking. Not by much. I still want blocking to be good because, but I do like to run the ball a little bit. I like to have a nice balance, and I will typically throw my passes short or medium. And so what I've found, not that I never get sacked, because I do, but I found that if you're throwing short or medium, you can get away with some more run blockers as opposed to pass blockers. So I tend to go in that direction. But if I get a good pass blocking offensive lineman, I'm not going to turn them down either. And then I'd say it's different too. Like from what I've heard, when you're game planning or when you're playing the game, similar to what you said, when I heard when you're throwing the ball, it's the offensive line is one unit, right? So they're all kind of combined, and their averages are all put together, and you get one unit. And so I don't pay too much attention. I tend to put my better players, my better pass blockers on the outside. And just because I know a lot of coaches tend to put their better linebackers on the outside too. So I put them on the outside, and then, but when I'm running the ball, and this I learned through, and I don't know for 100% that it's true, but it's been working for me so far. But I've learned from just going on and reading the boards, and actually, now that I'm on the topic, for any new guys out there, like you said, there's no set of directions that gives you everything, tells you what to do. I learned everything that I know about it just from reading the boards. I when I first started playing the game, I went back and I would read whenever I had a few minutes and was bored, laying in bed at night or something like that. I'd go back through the boards, and I'd just keep going back and back and back, and I got all the way till probably like 2 or 3 years back. Over the span of several months, just reading different posts. And I would skip over some because some were just like, hey, what's what's with recruiting? I've been offering players and nobody's responding. And you're like, oh, well, it's 24 hours, buddy.
When do they sign?
So, but I did go back, and if you go back, there's tons of good stuff from guys like, Pete 61 and Nitros and guys like that that'll tell you some of the secrets, and you kind of piece it all together. And I've learned a lot of what pretty much everything I've known just from kind of piecing those things together and trying them out and doing different things and site mailing people. But anyway, what I learned through that was from an offensive lineman standpoint, inside run is different than outside run. So when you're passing the ball, it's all one. The offensive line is one combined unit. Running the ball, however, what I was told was the inside run is factoring in primarily the center and two guards,
Right.
Versus the outside run is factoring in primarily the two offensive tackles. And so when I'm running the ball, I take my best run blockers, and I don't mix and match. I have one play for running outside, one play for running inside. And I put my best blockers inside on the inside runs, put them outside on the outside runs, and hope for the best. And that also, this is, I guess this probably isn't a secret. It's just something that I do. It gives me the ability, if that holds true, right? It gives me the ability to get some younger guys along the line some playing time, right? Because if I'm running outside, I don't need the best players inside. So I might put my freshmen and sophomores inside, and I'll put my seniors outside and run the ball, and vice versa. So it gives me the opportunity to get some young guys in, and then hopefully, if it's all true, we'll never actually know if it is, but if it's all true, I'm going to have some success running the ball. So,
well, you're absolutely right in that regard, because that's similar to the experiences that I've had. When running outside, I like to get I think it's your 01 and 02, because it goes 1, 2, 3, whatever, I can't remember. But basically the tackles. Those are going to be my two best offensive linemen structured for the run that I'm going to put out there. And if I'm running up the middle, I've got the guard and left, right guard, and center as my top three. Sometimes those guys on the outside are going to be one of those three guys on the inside when it goes to that next play, that inside run, because they just happen to be the best interior linemen, so to speak, as well. And I've experienced similar to what you're discussing, which, kind of slaps me upside the back of the head and goes, well, what about this whole singular unit thing? And it makes me think, like, when it comes time for a defensive front versus an offensive front, that's kind of the basic part of the equation that the programming looks at. And then it looks at, where's the run going? Okay, well, now let's isolate those guys. Now that we've got a whole solid core for the offense against a solid core of the defense, now let's isolate those guys and see if they do, in fact, come into play against the defensive counterpart. So, there's really a lot of the inside working that we don't understand, but, people like you have taken the time to experiment and try things out. And I'm just, I've been doing it 15 years and I still learn things, you know, and granted, it has evolved and it's not the same game it was even, 6-7 years ago. But for the most part, that's probably one of the more difficult aspects to comprehend and wrap your brain around, is how that offensive line works when it comes to those various plays. And the same with formations.
Yep.
When you're running the box and you've got two tight ends, talk about how those tight ends fit into that offensive line.
Yeah. So actually the tight ends and fullbacks are kind of something I'm still experimenting with and trying to figure out exactly how they work. And so I think there's a push and a pull a little bit with those guys, right? So if you have, so what I've been told, right, and I think it was Nitros specifically that told me this, and I think he got it right from the developer chats, and so those are ages old at this point, but assuming they're still, I don't think there's been any huge major engine changes, so I'm assuming they're still relevant. But when you factor in, just like you said, the outside run, it's a bunch of different players involved in that, right? So if you're running outside, it's, you maybe have the running back, obviously, you have the tackles, You have the tight ends if they're on the line and blocking. And then if you have a fullback blocking, the fullback will be factored in too. And then they're typically going up against, like, I think what was interesting is one of the primary defenders of outside run is a cornerback, according to the developer chats.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's, we're not talking about defense, but that's something I try to do, is try to keep some good tacklers at corner so they can defend the run. Or sometimes, honestly, I've recruited in the past. I don't do this that often, but in the past, like when I'm running low on money, recruiting, and I just need, one, like I just need to fill out the roster, I'll go after like a crappy cornerback that can tackle. And so, right. and if I play a team that likes to run the ball a lot, I can use them and throw them in. Otherwise, I don't use them at all. But I remember I've done that once or twice. But anyway, those positions all go into the equation when you're running outside. The hard part with tight ends and fullbacks is that I found is there's a point where having additional blockers helps, right? But only to a certain point. If those additional blockers suck, they're going to drag down the average of all of those players that are factoring into that equation. So, if you're running I used to run the box a lot, and I would typically I'd carry 4 tight ends usually. I'd carry two guys for the pass, usually one upperclassman, one lowerclassman, and two just stone cold blockers. That will just sit on the outside and block, because there is a benefit to having additional blockers, but only if those blockers are worth a damn.
Exactly.
And so and same with fullback too. Fullbacks will factor into the equation. If they're a good blocker, I think they help. They help because you got that additional guy blocking, but if they're not, they're going to drag the whole situation down. So I've had seasons where, the guy I put at fullback is just a freshman or a sophomore. If I'm just trying to fulfill a promise start or something like that, I'll throw a guy at fullback. But if he sucks at blocking, I'll take him out of the equation and I won't have him block. I just imagine him just standing there during the play,
taking notes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's some advice I gave a couple folks a long time ago, and their question was essentially about the box. How important are the tight ends? And I kind of explained the same thing you just did, where typically you'll run 4 or 5 tight ends if you're running a box offense, just because of the passing opportunity. Now, if you're going to structure it where you're not throwing to your tight ends, no biggie. But if you are, you need to differentiate between your receiving tight ends and your blocking tight ends, because it is the rare gem that is going to be a receiving tight end that is a monster blocker. Those are few and far out there. So
especially at the lower levels.
Yeah, exactly. I said you can actually get 2 super stud tight ends in a running game, and they can really cover up some of your shortcomings on the offensive line. If you've got a very mediocre or a decent offensive line, but you've got 2 stud tight ends that can block, and they're really studs, they can make up some of that shortcoming from your basic 5-man offensive line. And like you said, on the flip side of that, you don't want to make the mistake like I did one year running the box, where I had 2 receiving tight ends and I graduated my 2 blocking tight ends and didn't recruit anymore. So when it came time to running the ball, I struggled just because of that fact. I had decent offensive line, but when it came to the blocking cores or the categories, the values, those tight ends sucked because they were, geared to be receivers. They were converted wide receivers, to be honest. So, it really killed me. Lesson learned there. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons I still run the box occasionally, but I stopped. It used to be my primary, but I stopped running it because there was so much management of the tight ends, and it's tough because there's just not that many good tight ends. And so, especially at the lower levels, right? So I had with my Westchester team in Rockney, I ran the box for a long time. But but the problem was, and I could always find, I could usually find good blocking tight ends. That usually wasn't an issue for me. But what I had trouble with was receiving tight ends. Receiving tight ends are just, at D2, they're just not that great. They're like low end wide receivers. And so, unless you're going to redshirt them, which I don't. So unless you're going to redshirt them, you're going to have two of the receivers that you can potentially throw to on any given play are going to be lower end. Right. And so that's one of the reasons I moved away, especially when they're younger, because typically you're not, if you have a young tight end, he's not going to be pretty much anything except a fallback option in the offense. So,
now you mentioned, the preference that you have regarding avoiding sacks or minimizing the sacks is to throw those short, medium range passes. And that's something that I was doing when I ran the box years ago. Is I had two tight ends that had superb hands, exquisite technique, great game instinct, but they were relatively slow. So I used their deficiency to keep them close to the line of scrimmage and target them in the very short, and sometimes medium range, because I knew they weren't going to outrun anybody. And the further downfield they went, and into more coverage, they would run more times than not. By now they're touching on the free safeties and the strong safety. So as far as tight ends go, if you get a tight end that has wide receiver speed, elusiveness, really good hands, does that kind of make your mouth water into using him specifically for further down the field targets more often?
Yeah. So for me, it's the tight end that I'm going to feature, and I probably could experiment more with this. I just haven't, but the tight end that I would feature is rare. So, and I've had a few tight ends. I remember I took over a team. I forget what world it was in. It was in D1, and they had a tight end who was redshirted. He was very high, and he was awesome. So I came in. He was like a 85 overall rating or something like that, and so I made him one of the features of my offense that year, because my receivers just weren't that good. But aside from that, it's kind of rare because I don't usually redshirt them. And like I said, to get them to the point where I want to feature them in the offense, I have to redshirt them. I have them the way I have it set up. They're usually like my third or fourth option, and they're good. What I've noticed is they tend to get some big plays, especially when I have those like fast, elusive guys. Like they're not my primary target, but maybe the quarterback goes to his third read and he's there, the tight end's there, and they typically end up being good, like pretty big yards after catch guys and stuff like that. I don't know why, but
especially if they're on the slow linebackers.
They get just some rare that I've noticed that they tend to catch if. Yeah, exactly. So I don't feature them too much, but I have occasionally, depending on how good they were.
Now you mentioned,
but what I will do, like I was saying, it's very.
You froze up on us, or on my end anyway. I'm sorry. Let's see.
Very hard to. Good.
Yeah, you've totally frozen up on this end. Bear with me just a second. Are you back? Can you hear me? I totally lost you. You're locked up and looks like you're drinking a coffee mug there, or hot chocolate or something, but it's locked up. I don't know what's going on. Yep, he dissipated. He disappeared. Maybe he'll try to log back on and see if that can be fixed, because I know whatever Sean's got to tell us, it's worth listening to, and keeping your nugget. Hey, there he is. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know what the hell happened. I think I lost internet for a minute.
Yeah, I just it locked up on me, but so yeah, you were talking about the being able to take that nugget of good hands, good speed, wide receiver, and get maximum yards after the catch. But at this point, you don't really know how that correlates based on those factors, why he's getting those big yards after catch.
Yeah, I don't know, but my theory is that it's something to do with where he is in the progression. So I think he's like later in the progression, and so he's maybe open, or he's the one guy that breaks open and everyone else is covered, and just happens to be just gets big yards after the catch. I have noticed speed and elusiveness definitely are the key there, which isn't a secret. But for that reason, what I'll tend to do, especially when I'm looking for in a perfect world, right? You get when recruiting, you find a guy that can block and develop into a good pass catching tight end. But that's not always the case, and sometimes there's guys that just aren't there, and so then I dip my toe into the wide receiver world and see what they have to offer. And you got to find somebody good enough with good enough GI technique, and so that because you're going to switch positions, and when you switch those positions, he's going to take a hit. So
yeah, and I found too that the more athletic a player is, but I mean a big difference in athleticism, the lower he loses when it comes to changing positions. And of course, if he's a team player and all that other good stuff, but you get a team player that's got a good athletic rating and you go to changing, if he's going to a position that's basically empty, his work ethic will go up. But the amount of players at that position don't have an impact or aren't a decision factor in how much technique he loses or game instinct he loses. Right. And you can really kill a player if you convert him and not pay attention to those, as I call, secondary cores.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I like to. That's the one. Not the one thing. That's one of the things I don't like about the game is that they take so much away for position changes. I wish they were, because in real life that happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
And you don't turn into a moron as soon as you switch positions. But
right.
But at the same time, it does add a challenge. It does add a challenge to it, and so I appreciate that part of it. But yeah,
and everybody's having to deal with it. It's not like it's just one level; it's across all four levels, D3 through D1A, and there's no secret formula for figuring it all out. There's so many factors involved that you really, if you get close, you're doing good. Guessing before the position change. Now you talked about the progression of your tight ends. For those guys tuning in, kind of explain to them what that progression looks like and where that is established and how you go about setting that up. Not necessarily your particular formula, but where that happens.
Yeah. So the progression, and again, this is not something that's like officially written anywhere, but something that I've learned. So you set the progressions up both within the playbook and also within the formation. So what I was told was within the formation, when you're assigning weight, because it's easy to think when you first start. When I first started, I thought, all right, if I assign like 50% of the passes to wide receiver 1, he's going to get approximately 50%, and the next guy is going to get 25% or whatever I assign him, and that is not necessarily the case. I think it roughly follows that. But you should think of that more of a progression. So if I assign 50 to receiver number 1, and that's the highest number, the quarterback's going to look at him first. He's going to look at him first, and then he's going to go to the next guy's 30. He's going to look at him second. Next guy's 25. Look at him third. What I've noticed is the closer you put them together. So if you put somebody at 50 and the next guy is not till 20. He's going to look at him first pretty much every time.
Every time.
But if you put a guy at say 30 and the next guy's 28, they'll flip flop back and forth.
Flip flop. Yep.
Yeah. So the closer you put them together, the more variation there is. But so that's how, from a progression standpoint, if you want, and a lot of guys have said, and I've tried this, and I'm not sure honestly how I feel about this, but if you want your number one receiver, whether it's a running back, tight end, receiver, you want that number one guy, you want the ball in his hands, you should put him as like the second or third read, because a lot of times the first read might be covered. And so and if you read the play-by-play, that happens quite often, right? Like your quarterback will be guy number one is covered, so I went to guy number two. So if you want to put the ball in his hands, maybe put him later in the progression. And so that's how you do it within the formation. And then obviously within the playbook, you can say how often you want to send it deep, medium, right? And so if you have it set that when you're throwing it medium, it's going to go to your tight end most of the time. And then you throw medium most of the time in your playbook, you're going to have a heavy tight end game. So that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, one of the things too that I've shared in the past is the nuance of matching up your opponent's defense with your offense, and not giving away a big secret here, but let's just use a pro set for instance. You got two wide receivers. You got your wide receiver 2, who's being covered usually by the second cornerback, and depends on what defense is running. But for sake of argument, let's say that cornerback number 1 is on wide receiver 1, cornerback number 2 is on wide receiver number 2. And let's also say that your opponent has put his best cornerback as cornerback number 1. So he's covering receiver number 1, whoever's in that receiver 1 slot. If you take your best wide receiver and put him as wide receiver 2, now you've gained a little bit, because now your best wide receiver is against his second quality cornerback. So you set that up as your offensive formation. In your formation where you have that particular, let's say you choose to use wide receiver option 2 for that purpose. Go ahead and make sure that in the formation you target that guy. And like you said, possibly, at a 30 and your wide receiver 1 at a 50, he's going to be covered majority of the time for that first look. That leaves your wide receiver 2, who's actually your best wide receiver, improves his chances of being open for that reason. And on top of the fact that he's the better of the 2 wide receivers going up against a weaker of the 2 cornerbacks. So that kind of little nugget of wisdom sometimes can make a difference in a person's success rate. If you're constantly butting heads with your best player against his best player, it's just a stalemate, or it become frustrating for you because you're given the best that you think you've got, when in actuality, you could move some things around and swap some things around and see what actually do work best for you. So I always suggest people tinker with your lineup, tinker with your formations, and especially, as you alluded to, the progressions. Who are you giving that first look to? Look in the play-by-play, because your quarterback may have a high strength arm and be able to drill that ball through the tiniest hole and get it there. And you may have more success, running the best guy in wide receiver 1 because he's getting the looks. And even though he's covered, the quarterback's zipping him the ball and making it happen. Those are the nuggets that you get from reading that play-by-play. And I highly recommend, don't just read a play-by-play when you're scouting an opponent, seeing what their tendencies are. Read your own play-by-play after the game is played. That's where you're going to grow. That's where you're going to learn, and that's where you're going to find those little things that set you apart. How often do you do that as far as post-competition? I granted, against a sim, you're probably not going to learn a hell of a whole lot, but against a good quality coach, post-game breakdown.
So I actually think that reading play-by-play and understanding who is covering who for whichever opponent is the single most important part of this game. And primarily because that's how you set your matchups, right? If you're trying to figure out how to game plan and how you're going to attack somebody when you're in a big game against another human, and you see kind of where they line up their D-backs, how they line up their linebackers, understanding who is going to cover that your receiver is the number one priority, because if you don't understand that, you can't get that matchup. Let's say you want to
Right.
let's say you want to take advantage of their safeties because their safeties suck. You have to know who you can throw the ball to that's going to be covered by that safety and at what depth, right? And if they
Right, exactly.
and how does that change when you throw to a tight end? How does that change if you take your tight end and run him deep? How does that change the coverage? If you take your wide receiver and keep him in the very short range, how does that change it? If the defense blitzes, how does that change it? Then who covers who then? And so there's tons of variables to it. I still don't understand all of it. But getting a general feel for who is covering who, I think, is the number one most important part of how you game plan and how you can have success. And so I probably don't do it as much as I should now, just because I'm lazy and getting busy with work and stuff like that. And so, but when I do have time, I sit down and go through the play by play and see who's covering who, how quickly is my quarterback getting the ball out. Generally speaking, I've been told that if your quarterback is seeing multiple options, he's doing a good job, right? If he's throwing the ball to the first read every single time, that's probably not good. You want your guy to be, you want them to look and say, this person's covered, so I threw it to receiver C. Because that's when your quarterback's thinking through. So I do like to look through and make sure, my guys, and I used to experiment with different types of quarterbacks too, and say, if I have a high GI, how does that differ from like strength and technique? And essentially, I think you alluded to it earlier, but the strength and technique guys can tend to force the play in there,
Right.
Even if the guy's covered, versus the guy with the high intelligence might be able to go through the different progressions quicker and find the open guy better. So it really depends who you have, what type of offense you want to run. But yeah, all of those variables are super important, and the only way to really understand them is to experiment. And what's funny is, I run pretty much at this point, I run the same offense that I always do. But depending on the coach that I'm playing, it could be completely different, right? Like
Exactly. Yep.
I go and I at halftime, I look at the play-by-play and I'm like, why isn't my game plan working? And it's because I'm not getting the matchup that I thought I'd get. I'm getting matched up with the linebacker, or I'm getting, why is the linebacker covering the wide receiver so often? Stuff like that. So then you can figure out, if you understand who covers who, you can figure out what adjustments to make to then get the matchup that you want based on what they're running. But that's
exactly. And having said all that, one of the things that is really neat about this game, well, I guess neat's not really the right word, but is really a hidden secret to this game, the matchups, as you said, reading that play-by-play and figuring that out, but understanding that there's only so much defensively that you can do to generate matchups that are in your favor as a defensive coach. There's very little you can do on the defensive side of the ball. Who's covering who is about as far as you're going to go. But on offense, like you said, you can put that tight end out there that's going to pull the free safety. And now the free safety would normally be covering your wide receiver 2 on a particular play. Now he's going to be covered by a linebacker because the tight end has gone too far downfield for the linebacker to take him. And you've got a perfect matchup to your wide receiver. You manipulated that by planning for that, by making that happen based on the structure of your offense and the depth and the progression. Whereas with defense, you just throw them out there and you can blitz here and there. But other than that, there's really not a heck of a whole lot you can do other than moving your quality from one position to another. You're really not going to have effect on who's covering who. So in that regard, the roll of the dice is definitely in favor of the offense. If you can figure out who is covering who, or is it whom, what defense is covering what offensive player at what depth, at what point of the game. It's it's a game within itself. You know, and I
Yep.
always say there's 2 ball games in every game, the first half and the second half. But before any of those get played, there's the pregame, and that's that game planning. That's going through those lists and figuring out what they're doing, and like being able to be versatile enough so that you're not predictable, so to speak, because that just makes a defensive job that much easier. And I'm notorious for being predictable because I got so much going on. I'm lazy. And I'm like, I'll just run this out here in the first half, and if they stop it, I'll try something in the second half. If they don't stop it, I'm not going to fool with it. Or, and you fall into that pattern. You look, how the hell did I lose 2 games this season? Or how did I lose 3 games this season? Well, I was being lazy. So you got to take the time. It's not not black and white.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts of the game is that there's so many variables to it, and so every coach can have a completely different way to do it. And there's coaches that, I play and, I'll beat handily, right? And then I'll play somebody else who, and I'll look ahead at my next opponent, right? And let's say my next opponent already played the guy I just beat. And my next opponent got his ass kicked by that guy. So I'm thinking, all right, I kicked his ass and he kicked his ass. So I'm probably going to kick his ass too. And
Big
then
time.
he kicks my ass.
Exactly.
And you're like, how the hell did that happen? But it's all because everybody, and especially at the higher levels, where the coaches are all kind of on that similar talent level, right? And so it's almost like it depends. Like I've been in conferences with, actually Hookem usually gives me trouble for whatever reason, whatever he does. And I've beaten him before, but he usually gets the better of me for whatever reason. But then he'll get, I'll beat up on teams that he struggles with. So it's just weird, and it all depends on how every coach sets up their lineup and how they set up their playbook and stuff like that. Yeah. Which really speaks to how much control you really have, which is a lot.
Yeah, and the other thing too is when it comes to a running offense, you're looking at churning up the clock. You are going to just chew up as much clock as possible. So now you have to look at your offensive line, for instance, and say, out of these 10 offensive linemen that I carry, 7 of them are only worth playing. Do I substitute? Do I run my 4 best and maybe sneak a freshman in there to kind of keep some of that liveliness and keep those guys, fresher longer? Or do I just go ahead and go with the 5 best guys for as long as I can while they're fresh and try to run up the score and then get some of my freshmen in there, and so that my top guys recover? Those are all the different factors of the game that make no 2 games alike. It's just a matter of understanding all the little things. And that's one of the reasons I started this show, was because there are so many people out there who, were just throwing spaghetti against the wall and just taking whatever stuck. And then you'd see them on the boards bitching because, my God, I got the best running back in the world and he's getting, 1.9 yards a carry. What the hell? Have you looked at your offensive linemen? You got stud offensive linemen, but they've all got durability or a stamina of 20. They're out after 3 plays. And then you've got such guys in there. No wonder. So, and it's really refreshing to have someone like you come on and kind of share your experience and some of the trial and error. And hopefully that'll keep some of the others from having to go down that road, that painstaking road, to learn some of those things. But again, I appreciate you coming on. I know we're almost at the top of the hour for the show. So any parting words before we call it a night?
No, just what are your thoughts on the playoff?
I'm actually looking forward to seeing how the dynamics work. Yeah. I'm excited about it, if for no other reason than it's something new.
Right.
We know what the bowls look like. Now, would I love to see the playoffs combined or tied to a bowl so that you still have that I won the Orange Bowl thing? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And maybe it'll evolve to where that is. But for the playoff at D1, the separation, at D1 AA, D2, and D3, there are no elites. They're human made elite because of the history that a coach has with the team or whatever. But at D1, you do have those 14 elites. And I think that the playoff hopefully will bring up some of the parity to where some of those elites don't have an easy road like they've had in the past, only having to play those 14 games. You get a guy that's got an elite and he's 13 regular season games. He's in the conference championship. He plays a bowl game. 15 games, he may lose once. Well, now that there's the bowl games are gone, now we got the playoffs. He may win an extra game here or there, but at the same time, he may be booted early. And now one of those mid tiers is racking up those wins.
Right.
And he's able to get, a little more prestige, if nothing else. He's not going to overtake that elite status, but I think there's going to be some upsets. There's going to be a whole lot of bitching on the boards about, how in the hell this team, who is this? This team came out of nowhere, They came out of Conference USA. They were 9-4. They don't even deserve to be in the playoffs, and they won the national championship. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
That's the one thing I do like about it, and I'm excited for it. Is that the bowl? Unless you're in those top bowls, the day 5 bowls, it's pretty much who cares. If I get to the point when you lose 2 games and sometimes you lose, you play some really good coaches, you lose 2 super close games, and all of a sudden your season's over, and it's like, all right, well, what does it matter from here on out, essentially?
Let's play freshman.
I'm excited to be able to jump in and still have a shot at the end of the season to make a run. So that'll be fun.
Exactly. And the thing, I don't remember who I was talking to now, but anyway, it was like, once the conference championships are over with, you got a 50-50 chance at who's going to be the national champion. Because once the conference championships are over, hey, that What If Sports championship game, one of those guys is going to win. Now when the conference championships are over, you've got 30-some teams as it's sketched out to be, or even more. You don't have that 50-50 anymore. It could be any one of those, literally. I mean, look what Akron did that one year in the One World. From ashes to winning the national championship. So I'm looking forward to that happening. If for no other reason, just to laugh at the bitching that's going to be on the forums.
Well, the bitching on the forums happening either way. So.
Well, that's true. That's true. And it makes for a good discussion and triggers the brain to think about what if, and that's why they got the name What If Sports, because what if I change this guy? What if I move this guy? So it's working out. Well, Sean, appreciate you making time for us, brother, and getting on here and digging deep into some of your analytics to focus on some of the new guys and let them see kind of a little bit of the thought process and the things you have to think about, because half of it is knowing what you don't, or you don't know what you don't know. So half of it is knowing that you got to learn and you got to dig. And we appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us tonight, brother. Now, before I go,
thanks for the invite. It's good catching up.
I got to ask, because I know people are going to get on me and say, why didn't you ask him? What's the numbers on the hat? Is that a zip code?
It's a zip code. Yep.
There you go.
It's Newtown, Pennsylvania.
There you go. So now don't ask me. It's on the show. You heard it. Hey guys,
I usually put the zip code on the eye black when I'm playing Gridiron Dynasty.
There you go. Yeah, they used to do with the area code 501.
Like Reggie Bush.
Yeah, and Darren McFadden and those guys. Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you being on so much. Definitely means a lot. I know a lot of guys are kind of reluctant to give their secrets, but you did a good job without giving out too much secrets, I think. So appreciate that.
Yep. All right. Good catching up, Magic.
2 weeks.
Thanks for the invite.
What's that?
See you.
Oh, anytime. Anytime. We're going to be on again in about 2 weeks. All right. Have a good night.